Welcome to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and join me as we talk to other knife makers and craftsmen about anything and everything knives. Welcome again to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and I am joined by Lucas Cao of Squid Industries. Lucas and the Squid Industries team specializes in making trainer and live edge balisongs or flippers. And I thought it would be a great opportunity to have him on the podcast today to talk a little bit more about the flipper community, his start in it. And so thanks again, Lucas, for joining me.
Yeah, Aaron, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure. For everyone out there who doesn't know what a balisong is, it's more commonly known as a butterfly knife. So hopefully you guys have heard of that.
Yeah, I kind of forget sometimes. So for everybody listening, a lot of people are familiar with fidget spinners and the culture around fiddling with things, and it was kind of through that like the spinners and fidget spinner type of industry that I first heard of Squid Industries. And specifically, when I started going to knife shows and like the blade circuit of knife shows, I got to see that firsthand. So that's kind of like my exposure to it. I've obviously with my knife making journey and everything, I've seen balisongs and they're iconic in movies and things like that as well. But Lucas, tell me a little bit about how you actually got into butterfly knives and flipping and everything like that. Like when did that start and what kind of precipitated all of it?
Yeah, so it's about 10 years ago when I was first introduced to it. So in 2013, I just graduated high school, and my buddy had got a butterfly knife from a local Chinatown. And he brought it to me, and he's like, "Lucas, I think that you'd be great." Oh, we're both named Lucas, just to be clear. He thought that I would be great at it because I have a history of other fidget hobbies like yo-yoing, Rubik's cubing, pencil spinning, all very similar hobbies. And so he knew that I would definitely be interested. And when he showed me, I was for surely terrified at first glance. I wanted nothing to do with it because it seemed extremely dangerous. But after seeing him do a couple tricks and just kind of trying it out for myself, I thought that it was pretty interesting. So I decided to kind of pick it up as a hobby. And essentially what happened is that I got better and better at flipping. At the time, there was a couple YouTubers. There's only a handful of channels that had YouTube tutorials for flipping. And over time, I got better at flipping, and I wanted to be able to learn more tricks and also try other knives because for those of you who are familiar with flipping or any other sport that uses some kind of racket or club, is that every single item has its own nuances and balance, feel, aesthetics. So knives are no different, and so I wanted to explore all the options around. So I started getting really deep into the collecting of it. And, I started joining, all of these online forums, and, that's how I got really introduced to the hobby.
That's cool. In your balisong or butterfly knife collecting, did you ever acquire any like custom made balisongs?
I did actually. It was one of my most successful YouTube videos when I was first getting into it. There's a knife maker by the name of Chris, I think Olafson. He used to go by 29 Knives. I'm not sure if he's around. I haven't seen his work in a while, but I did actually purchase, not directly from him, but that was one of my first custom balisongs. It was gargantuan. It's much larger than a typical conventional balisong that you'd want to actually flip. Most balisongs are, on average, they're about 10 inches in total length. The handle's around 5.5 inches. That's standard nowadays. But I think this one was close to maybe 12 inches in total length, with the handles being almost 7. And yeah, it was definitely interesting. It was far too precious for me to do a lot of flipping with, so I ended up selling that one.
Yeah. How does the build quality compare from a custom made balisong to what you were used to in the production world?
Um, well, I honestly, it really depends on the maker. I think that custom is obviously a very vast word, and custom can mean many things. And Chris from 29 Knives is an incredible maker, so it was extremely impressive to see the work that he did with his hands. And but I think that the production knives that I had at the time were also impressive in their own rights. So to me, it's a little bit difficult to directly compare. I think the production knives I had at the time that I had that custom knife was a couple knives from Blade Runner Systems. I had some things from Hom Design, some from Benchmade, and I think a couple from Microtech as well. And all of those were equally impressive in their own ways.
Yeah, I've talked to a few custom knife makers about getting into balisongs. Not myself, but they're looking for other things to challenge themselves with. And I know quite a few knife makers that would turn down balisongs. And yeah, and I mean it has a lot to do with the fact that they are impressed by the fact that the mechanism itself and the balance and like the nuances of the knife is something that is like a completely different world from even traditional like spring knife, pocket knives, lockbacks, liner locks, like the normal stuff that you see in the custom knife making world.
Yeah.
It's a completely different beast. So
Yeah.
I don't really know anybody that I'm close to that makes balisongs at all.
Yeah, another thing too that I've heard from, I think his name, I'm not sure if he's still going under this name. His name's CMF Ian from Arizona. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. And he used to make balisongs, but he eventually transitioned to folders. And when I asked him, would he ever come back? And he's like, it's tough for me to say, Lucas, because with balisong there's twice as many handles, so it's and in folders there's only one, so the profitability is much higher on a standard folding knife. There's so much work that goes into a balisong.
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, and also there's a certain expectation of materials. I feel like the titanium and Damascus and other kind of ritzy materials are. And maybe that's just my impression, but it's more expected in the custom world of balisongs. And so you kind of have to keep up with the Joneses in order to manufacture and be relevant in that way.
I feel like that intuition makes sense, and I would agree, but I think that no one has actually tried making custom knives with lower materials. It's just, I think generally the purchasing audience for custom knife would want that, but I feel like there's still success to be had with lower materials as long as the design is well thought out and it performs well. So it's just not typical for that customer type to just aim for that price range.
Yeah, and the kind of the point being is there is a diminishing return when it comes to custom knife making, because I'll tell you, if I'm making a knife and I'm trying to target a consumer market, so like the let's just say $400 market, in order to do that, I have to make things simple, right? And I have to use simple materials. However, if you want to put out a good product, like the fit and finish has to be something. Like you don't want to buy like an entry level flipper and it look like a prison shank, right? And so that's kind of where, in order for a custom maker that's doing everything by hand to get it to that level, it takes a lot of time. And if I'm only selling it for like $350 or $400, it's not really worth my time, where you could do the same thing in maybe half the production time for a fixed blade or even some simple, like slip joints or something.
Right.
And so I could see that. So, I mean, but kind of like on that note, and it's interesting, like going from you collecting to manufacturing. And I will pause here and say, I do appreciate on your website that you have a chronology of how you kind of got started and how that affected your schooling and stuff. And I'd like people to hear it from you directly.
Sure.
But I do appreciate that, because I felt like I at least knew what your at a surface level what your journey was from where you started to now. And that's one of the the compelling pieces where I really wanted to talk to you. But
yeah, absolutely. So I started flipping in 2013, and I was collecting for several years after that, and learning how to flip. And at the time, I was going to community college, and I was also working part-time at my parents' place. My parents owned a small electronics manufacturing company. It was about 8 employees, and we had a very small machine shop, just one machinist and 2 really old used machines. It was mainly for R&D work, nothing serious. And I worked there as a saw cutter, just prepping stock. So I didn't really have a lot of experience. I was doing very basic work. And at the time, business was kind of slow. So we had quite a bit of free time to ourselves. And as I was getting really deep into collecting and flipping and engaging with all my friends online, I was trying to help a lot of people get into the hobby, because I enjoyed flipping so much that I went out of my way to assist others online to figure out what's the best knife for a certain price, or based on your preferences, what do you recommend. And I was doing a lot of that on all sorts of forums, including Reddit, where eventually I got voted on to become the head moderator there. So what ended up happening was that people seemed to be asking for something that flipped well, but at a lower price. Generally, the people I was helping, they were asking for the best flipper for under $20, $50. A lot of these guys are kids. They're in high school or middle school, and they didn't really have a large budget. But at the time, it was unfortunate that the best recommendation I had was the Benchmade 51 Morpho, which retails for about $225, which was far beyond the budget of most high schoolers. So, that got me thinking after a few months. I was like, maybe I could make a budget-oriented flipper that had great balance, and maybe just reduce a little bit of the durability and aesthetic features, but still performed like a great flipper. So I went to my boss and I said, hey, can you help me prototype a couple ideas? I showed him kind of like a rough napkin sketch of a design I had. And I said, I want to use these materials, and I want to try to use this design. I gave him my whole collection of knives. I think I had 5 or 6 nice knives. I said, let's take all these dimensions and let's just take the average, and, we'll try to make something here. And I posted that work online, and I kind of shared everyone my journey. I was like, hey, I'm making this thing, and I hopefully, if it's good, I can, make a couple and sell them. And people seem to be really interested. I documented the whole process. If people are curious, it's on our Instagram. If you scroll all the way down, there's quite a few posts, but if you scroll all the way down, you'll see, all the steps that I took to make the first prototypes. So eventually I ended up posting up a couple, and they sold instantly, which shocked me, because I guess at the time I was surprised that people would trust my my design. But I guess at the time there's really nothing like it. Nobody was making budget-oriented balisongs that were made specifically for flipping. At the time, a lot of butterfly knives were made for as a knife, not necessarily to be flipped. It was made to be a great EDC tool. And there was some training, but most of them were kind of like gas station knives. They weren't really well made. They were mainly just to look cool and just to have just to show off. But nothing meant for flipping. So I think that's what really captivated a lot of my audience. So I sold a couple, the first 4, and those sold super quickly. And then after that I was really shocked with the response. So I asked my parents for a little bit of help to start the first batch of 50, and so I sold those, and it just kept cascading. I sold the 50 the next month, and it went instantly again, and I'm thinking holy cow, I got to get more. So throughout the year. That was actually in 2016. That was January 2016 where I sold the first batch of 50. I think I sold another couple hundred throughout that year. At the end of 2016, I ended up transferring to UC San Diego because I had aspirations to study mechanical engineering. And so I took a break from making as I didn't have access. But during the summer of 2017, I decided that I really wanted to keep it going, and I decided that I was going to hire a couple guys to work for me back at home, so that when I went back to school, I would be able to just kind of send them parts so that they could do the assembly and the shipping and the warranty, as I kind of remotely managed the business from UC San Diego. So a couple guys that I'd met in college through the flipping hobby. One of them was actually I met through Instagram. The other one was a customer that I had actually delivered to a product locally to. I tried to actually drive the first few products to people who lived close to me because I thought it'd be really fun to meet my customers. So that was a really cool experience. So I ended up hiring these guys. Their names are TV and Wei, and they basically are the first guys that kind of like work remotely with me. So that basically went on for a couple of years, and I decided that I'd continue this for a while, and eventually I went part-time because it got so busy. And at a certain point, the business was growing so quickly, and I was putting so much time into it that I decided, well, maybe it's time that we buy our actual machine. It seems like outsourcing parts wasn't really the move. When I had moved out to UC San Diego, we stopped using my parents' shop to help us make parts, and I had started outsourcing to local shops in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we also worked with some shops out in the Midwest. And I was getting a little bit tired of certain lead times and not really quality issues, because the quality was generally good, but I just wanted to be able to control the timing a little bit better. So I decided to pull things in, and I was like, okay, I'm going to buy a machine, and I'm going to figure out how to use it. So I told my parents that I'm going to take a 3-month break, take 1 quarter off, I'm going to run it, and then I'm going to train one of the guys. I'm going to go back to school and finish the degree. But that ended up not happening. So in December of 2018, we got the first machine. During that winter quarter, I ended up, instead of going back, I ended up buying a second one, and I've been full-time with Squid Industries ever since.
Well, I mean, I have to say, so I was homeschooled, and then I enrolled in community college, and then went to university. I was going to pursue a veterinary degree, and I previously worked in IT, doing systems administration, and eventually in cybersecurity. And while I was going through school, a job came up that I was making good money for me, being in my early 20s and everything like that. And I was like, man, I can't see spending so much time and energy in a degree where I'm going to be over $100,000 in debt and in like 6+ years of further education just to make about what I'm making now, right?
Right.
And I think there's a lot of knowledge that you can get from college and from structured learning, but you're living the dream, right? Like the mechanical engineers want to study those things to be able to do what you're doing now. So you kind of like short circuited that process. I mean, you have to be a little proud of that.
Yeah, I think I am. I mean, I don't think about it too often. When people point it out and they say like, man, that's the dream. It does force me to take a step back and look at it and just try to be a little bit more grateful for the opportunity, for sure. I think that it's pretty rare for people to have the opportunity I did to find such a unique way to create a business and not need to utilize a degree to get that business to be successful.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, there's lots of things that I still agree. Higher education is it's the path, right? You have to, because there are things that you get in there you just can't get in a experience based type of lifestyle. But That's something that impresses me too, because, especially, I think that we're at a paradigm shift in our cultures, especially in American culture, where people are starting to look at education and the costs associated with it, and wonder, do the ends justify the means? And I think that there's a lot of use cases that the younger generation, like my kids, see, to say, oh well, I don't have to necessarily follow this. Like, I go to high school, I go to college or university, I study this thing, and then I decide what I want to do throughout this period. Like, it's not so like prescriptive. Like, sometimes it's just, well, you find something that you're passionate about and you pursue that. And if you have the grit and determination, then maybe that actually works out. Maybe it doesn't. What do you do? And like when I look at your journey, that's something that I'll use as a use case for my kids to say, hey, like Lucas did this thing and he found his niche and he is passionate about it. And those are definitely qualities that my kids, and I think that young kids, can emulate in trying to find what works for them and what they can be passionate about.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I definitely think that finding unique solutions in niche markets, there's always going to be opportunity there. Whether they're going to be profitable, I'm not sure, but I definitely think that that's where I feel kind of lucky. But yeah, I think that passion takes people far, and it took me far. So that's definitely important to me.
Yeah. So you started manufacturing, on in an in-house scale, and man, that has to have a humongous learning curve associated with it. Like, can you talk a little bit about, so you got one machine and then you made the decision to get another machine and add in production turnaround and design, like talk about that. Like, this is crazy to me.
Sure. So I remember, I had actually asked, I was fortunate enough to become good friends with the owners of Hom Design and Blade Runner Systems, and I think that I still am to this day. At the time, I was, a kid. I still am, and I was a nobody at the time. And I had asked them as I was starting my business. I said, what kind of shops you guys work with? Like, who makes this stuff, and how do they do it? And I think that, them being smart business owners, they didn't want to necessarily reveal their secrets. They were relatively cryptic about their answers. And so I figured, I was like, okay, well, it seems like I'm just going to have to figure this out myself, huh? So that's essentially what I did. I used the power of the internet, and, there's far more resources on there than I had imagined, especially for CNC machining. So, I had outsourced the parts for many years, and over those years, I had gotten a slightly better understanding. But when I got the machine itself, it was definitely a huge undertaking on its own. But like I said, there are quite a few number of resources online, and I was able to use those online resources to just kind of like, I'm trying to find the word, brute force my way into it. And I broke a lot of tools. I ruined a lot of parts. And but eventually, through good troubleshooting and critical thinking, I was able to figure out a process that I was able to reliably make good parts. And yeah, I did a lot of trial and erroring for several months. I think I ran the machine myself for the first probably 6 months. And then after that, I ended up hiring my first machinist. And that's a great story, actually, is that my parents' company, my boss, name's Fat, Phat, he's the one that kind of mentored me in machining. I did end up taking some additional courses at my local community college to learn how to do drafting and modeling so that I could have those parts outsourced. But when it came to like machining knowledge and just general stuff, my boss, Fat, really mentored me and gave me that knowledge. So my parents' business unfortunately ended up closing, and so that was an opportunity for me to hire my boss as my first machinist, which was really cool, and really interesting dynamic change. and he's still a machinist here with us to this day, which has been great. So he had received curriculum from the early 2000s. This is way before we had the advanced software that we use today. So it was kind of like a shift where after I had gone through this huge 6-month journey of learning how to use software and all these new machining techniques, that I was kind of teaching him. So that was a really interesting experience, and it was fun. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, I ended up buying 2 of the same machines. So if you're curious, it wasn't 2 of the 2 different machines. I bought Haas VF2 SS.
Mm-hmm.
For any of the listeners out there who are interested in starting a machine shop or manufacturing business, I would recommend a Haas. I agree with most machinists out there that it's not like the best machine, but I think it's the best value in that it's a great machine to start out with because it has so many resources out there. It's a really, really popular machine, so the community is really vast and the resources are really vast. And when it comes to the performance compared to the price, it's definitely something that I would recommend. I do know that a lot of guys who start out, they start a little bit smaller. It's generally with a Tormach. That's a pretty popular machine to kind of get your feet wet with CNC machining, and that's a great machine as well. But if you're trying to hit real production numbers reliably with good accuracy, then I think that the step to the Haas is well worth the money. Although it is a pretty big jump, so I don't blame anyone who isn't able to make that jump. So you can definitely do great with a Tormach.
What I think is interesting to note, and just so people can grasp the monumental task of actually getting to being able to run a CNC machine is it's not just the machine, right? It's like you have to have a facility that has the right power. You have to have all the tooling that you think you need. You need to be able to run all the programming. You need to be able to have all the understanding of how to set up your workspace and everything for actually machining the parts. Like there's a ton that goes into that. And every mistake is expensive. It's like people I get mad when I break a $20 carbide bit. But I mean, if you're talking like hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for certain types of tooling, and I mean, and it's expensive in that trial and error phase of learning.
Mm-hmm.
It gets really expensive really fast.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think that one region where I definitely lucked out, and that's a topic we can talk about, is basically luck versus hard work or skill. Is a lucky part for me was that I was able to utilize my parents' facility so that I could actually store my machine, and the facility already had power and we had the space. And I think that for anyone who wants to install a CNC machine, it's not an easy feat to get that properly hooked up and set up, because it requires a lot of power and space. So that was definitely something that worked out in my favor. In that eventually we did ended up taking over the building and the lease as my parents' company declined. So it was quite a natural takeover. So it kind of worked out beautifully there.
Yeah, and the overhead of starting a new facility is a little bit different when you can slap into an existing facility that has all the accoutrements that you need, right?
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah, I know Princeton Wong. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, Princeton and I are well acquainted.
Oh, there you go.
We've worked. We haven't actually made knives together, but him and I have worked together on certain things. And yeah, he's in the Balisong space as well, and it's good to know who your friends are in the space. And he's an amazing maker for sure.
Yeah. So Princeton and I, we handle some of the technical side of the Knife Makers Guild, and we know each other pretty well. But I remember when he was building out some of his tooling and whatnot, I just looked at it and I was like, I don't know that I ever really want to do that, but for the sake of production work. But it fascinates me because we're not just talking about what you're doing with balisongs and the community. We're talking about just the sheer technical ability it takes to be able to run those machines and then produce a product and then do it in a manner that is affordable to your end users, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. It's I feel like it's outsourcing was definitely the smart way to start. I had planned to have like parts as a cushion, and I definitely didn't dive into manufacturing my own without parts to keep me afloat. I did buy myself time so that we had items to sell while I was trial and erroring and destroying parts before I made good ones.
Yeah. So what was the transition into making trainers and everything like that? So you were manufacturing actual balisongs for use, but they were but with this mind towards flipping. But then what transitioned you into also making trainers?
Well, actually, the first products I ever made were trainers. Trainers was the focus of the business and the start of the business.
Okay.
So I didn't transition into knives until much later. So yeah, it's just it's trainers are just much more simple to make. There's no sharpening, and actually back in my first products, I didn't even heat treat the blades, which is embarrassing to think about now because it wasn't amazing. I remember talking to a knife maker, and he was interested in design. He's like, "Hey, I'd love to buy one." And I was like, "Yeah." Like, he's like, "What blade steel are you using?" And I was like, 304 stainless. He's like, "Dude, what? That's awful." And I'm like, "Really?" I was like, "I chose it because it was affordable." And he's like, "Well, there's a reason why it's affordable." And I'm like, "Shoot." So I remember that conversation vividly. But yeah, it's just a lot easier. It's a lot easier to make a trainer to start out with. Eventually, when we transitioned to knives a couple years later, and I think it was 2017. We didn't make them in house because I didn't have the knowledge or the technology to actually do the grinding. The bevel grinding is, obviously something you have to do by hand, or you need some very, very fancy, special equipment for that. So that's why we ended up starting out with trainers. It's just way easier.
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah, there's I believe he's a Canadian knife maker. His name is Aaron Gall, and he figured out doing a bunch of I guess semi-production CNC work where he's doing he hardens his billets so they're profiled and everything, and then he hardens them, if I remember correctly, and then he machines them from a hardened billet.
I'm familiar with him. I definitely looked into his work very deeply before we started doing pretty much a very similar process. So we in 2019 or 20, I wanted to not just rely on outsourcing the knives. I wanted to make them in-house, but I didn't have the fancy equipment to make the knives in-house. So that's when I found Aaron, and we developed our own process to do pretty much the same thing as, hardening the parts first and then machining them on our 3-axis CNC mills. But news for the audience and for me soon is that sometime in June is that we'll be bringing in our very own CNC bevel grinder. So that's been a long time coming, and it's a piece of equipment they're all very excited to have.
Nice. Well, I mean, that's interesting. It's cool to me, at least, to find somebody else to talk to that uses the internet and research the way that you do, because that's, I have to really engage my Google foo sometimes for IT work. And so I've just, as a cross discipline, I just applied that to knives, and I'm like, well, if it exists on the internet, I usually can find it. But thank God for the community and publishing things on like YouTube and Reddit and whatnot, where people can like me can learn that through osmosis, because doing a lot of that stuff with trial and errors can be kind of costly and expensive too. I think I've cut a lot of my learning curve out by doing all this research and being able to see other people do it on the various platforms.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of good resources out there on the internet. Just got to know how to find it.
Yeah. So, what would you say that your spread is on, production, like a production balisongs versus your trainers? Do you find that there's more like kids interested in your trainers as compared to your full balisong builds or whatever? Kind of, what does that look like?
That's a hard question because I don't think that we have a fair representation and offering between the two products. For our live blade offerings, we have very few options, and for our trainers, we have much more expansive product lines. For our live blades, we only have two products at the time currently, and for our trainers, we have many more, and many more of them are at the lower end. So we have trainers between like 45 and 300, spanning that whole price range. But for our live blades, we have products around 250 to 300, and then the other product line is 700 and up. So it's not really a great comparison. And also because the business was really established in trainers first and not really equally with live blades and trainers. So I think there's some influence there. But I will say that we do have a lot of young adolescents and also international customers that are really enthusiastic about the trainers. For young kids, a lot of parents aren't okay with flipping knives, so trainers is generally a good compromise there. And also for a lot of international customers, butterfly knives are just straight up illegal to have. So if they want to get into flipping, then their only option is a trainer.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I at Blade Show Texas this year, I bought two of your squiddies. I think it was like the $75 ones, the ones with the
yeah, that one's made of Ultem, the Squiddy A.
Yeah, and they love them. I mean, they're like always clicking around. But at shows, my first experience with like the flipping community really was in these kids that were walking around and flipping and stuff. And at Blade Show, I'm going to say it was at Atlanta. There was one flipper who lost control of their knife and it went and flew in the air and slammed on somebody's table, like display table. And there's like the crotchety older generation are like those dang flippers, and there's it's generally associated with I guess I don't know, maybe a nuisance type of thing, like I don't know, but like when I bought those flippers and the kids started kind of like going through the rudiments and wanting to like go on your website, I guess they went on YouTube where you have different training videos and stuff.
Yeah,
I kind of gained a little bit more of an unbiased appreciation for just how technical the flipping I guess world is. And I tried a few and I knocked my knuckles a few times and I'm like, I don't know if this is for me. I'm not as coordinated as they are.
Yeah, it's definitely a skill that takes quite a bit of patience and dexterity for sure.
Yeah. So what does that look like? So you have this, a business that feeds the community of flippers and everything. Do you guys regularly compete in flipper competitions, or what does that look like? And on the one hand, where you're manufacturing for the community, and then what role does Squid Industries play in the flipper community itself as a, I guess, demonstrator or trainer or things like that?
Yeah. So for us, we focus on obviously providing the product. But I would say the other thing that we're quite proud of is that we also host an annual live blade flipping competition at Blade Show West. So we've done it since 2019, and it's been a really, really successful event ever since. We have 32 flippers, go head to head in a bracket style tournament, and at the end there's a bunch of knives and cash prizes as well for the winners. And we try to stimulate the community with in-person competitions and also online events so that people are enjoying the hobby more and getting to know each other better, and just overall just grow the hobby.
Yeah, that's cool. So um, I'm interested to know. So you have your lines of balisongs that are edged, right?
Hmm.
But like when you manufacture those and then provide them to the customer, there's not a lot of extra customization that you can do, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that for our particular products, there's not a whole lot of things that you can really change for what we have, and I don't I think that's partly because of the way I've designed them. Uh, there's not a lot of interchangeability with the parts. We don't have a lot of only one of our products has G10 scales. You can obviously change those out, but the rest of the product line are all just solid channel. We call them channel, but I think most of the knife industry calls it billet. Um, so you can't really change the materials out. You can obviously change hardware, but apart from that, there's not a whole lot of things you can really do apart from standard aesthetic changes like acid washing the blade or various things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, one thing I thought was interesting from somebody I've known for a while now. His name is Bruce Bump. He's an ABS mastersmith, and he developed out this pocket knife called his Formula One, and you can search it on Google. But basically, the idea is that he built a pocket knife that is it almost fully modular. Like if you wanted to have another blade made by somebody else to his specifications, you could do that.
Mm-hmm.
But like the handle scales and the pocket clips and the bearings and everything like that can all be changed out, so that way you can really, like, once you purchase that platform, you can really kind of like customize it to do your own things. So it's all titanium frame and everything, so you could do your acid etching or your heat anodizing or whatever. And I always thought that was interesting because, like when you have a product that you yourself, you manufacture, and you have kind of like this start stop process for how you manufacture it.
Mm-hmm.
That the thing that keeps a consumer like me interested in is the modularity of it, where you can you can put different kind of bearings to see how they feel. You can do different types of finishes and whatnot. So that kind of keeps me interested because I don't fidget as much as I tinker.
Mm-hmm.
And so like what I have one of Bruce's Formula Ones, and I found that like when I'm getting bored with something, I'll just kind of say, oh, I can make a new set of scales for this. We'll just see how this new material works or whatever. But I'm like a knife maker, and I go out and do that stuff in my shop versus somebody with, if you could buy individual modular parts by a manufacturer, it'd be a completely separate industry of making complementary parts and mods for the base model or whatever. So if you
Yeah,
ever
absolutely.
if you ever get into that kind of thing, I would actually be interested in playing around with it, because I think that concept is really cool.
Yeah, definitely. I'll try to be more creative in my design process. Um, I,
I didn't mean it that way.
no. I know you didn't mean it that way. What I meant is that I started the business with a very specific focus. I knew that I was going straight for production, right? I saw that there was success in making a product that was streamlined and not complicated, that used very few parts, and that basically meant that you could maximize production, and so I I think I've carried that throughout my process for all of our products, and that I want things. I designed everything with manufacturability in mind. I think that's one of my strengths, but the weakness is that I think I could be a little bit more creative with details and designs, and I tend to stray away from that because generally those things cost more. Just more time in the machines, or material costs, or various hand finishing or whatnot. So yeah, I think that my designs are um, relatively simple because I've wanted them to be easy to manufacture. So I think it would be a good idea and a great experience for me to like really stretch my creative muscles and try to make something that was super modular.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a process guy, right? So that's kind of what I get paid for. So the concepts are interesting to me, but how often do you have like a good business model and everything, and somebody comes up and says, "Hey, that's really cool, but you should do this," and like really, my interest in talking with you is that you're a very authentic person, and your company is very authentic, and your mission is very authentic, and all of those things equal a very successful business where I hope that you feel that the community supports you in that, and changing up things to chase an idea sometimes don't always pan out, but that at least is something that I think appeals to my my thinking, is the modularity side of it. But I'm also not your target audience, I would say. I mean,
No,
my kids are, and I mean, that's where I'm in support of what you guys do, because it gets them into something that they can mess around with, and it builds new neural pathways and things. And I don't have to worry so much about the exorbitant cost of going to the emergency room either.
yeah, no, I mean, like, just looking at companies like, for instance, a great example would be like Flytanium, right? It's like personalization and customization is an industry in its own, and I think that that's something I just overlook. So I definitely think that there's something that I could learn from that and just figure out how to be, utilize that better.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the very least, just keep doing you. I mean, I'll sit on the sidelines and continue to watch what you do. I kind of do that with a lot of different makers, because it's fascinating to me to see what you come up with, right? And then that's something that I've really appreciated about your journey through Balisongs, is just that I'm never not interested in what you're doing. So anytime you guys have drops or things like that, I'm always kind of looking at the sidelines to see what you're producing, and any announcements and things. So
Thanks, I appreciate that.
well, I mean, it's interesting too, because you have a decent social media following, and it seems like everybody is pretty highly engaged in what you're doing. And to me, there's some conversations that I've had with custom knife makers and non-production makers, right? So it's all custom, it's all small batch and things like that. And what is that? I guess the secret sauce is probably the wrong word, but what do you do to build a successful business, and how do you nurture that? And like Matt Martin is a knife maker up in Michigan, was saying that it's about that community. It's about the people who believe in the same dream. And if I look at the cross section with your business, I also see that same dynamic. So it's kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, I'm glad you see it that way. I think that what I think about a lot is that I think that we were successful at the start and continue to be successful, is that we were like a champion for the community. I was a really avid flipper, a really passionate collector, and I really wanted other people to enjoy the hobby the same way I enjoyed it. So, that's why I went out of my way to find a solution. And so and that's what I continue to do is try to find solutions. But I think for me, the hardest part is knowing when to listen to the customers and when to not listen to the customers. I think that my most successful products to this date are the products that people didn't know that they wanted. And I think a really great example of that is the Squiddy. When I introduced it in, I think it was in the winter of 2017, I got a lot of backlash for it. At the time, titanium was still a very dominant material. And, Squid Industries, as a company, like, we started making aluminum, and that's something we kind of pioneered in the balisong space. But going to plastic was really controversial, because obviously flipping has a very, very, strict requirement on durability. I think that perhaps it might have the highest standards of durability because I mean, a lot of people might use their knives heavily, and I definitely see that there's a lot of people that hard use them, but balisongs are used in a very unique way. They're because of the nature of it, they get dropped and purposely damaged in ways that most knives aren't. So I think that requirement makes it difficult to use materials like plastic. So most people reasonably were skeptical. They're like, there's no way that a balisong could flip well and also be durable enough to handle flipping. So eventually, over time, though, as people got to use the Squiddy and see the product line and its value, it became really pivotal. And now I think that the Squiddy made it normalized, and it's expected. And there's so many makers who have made businesses out of making plastic balisongs. I've seen like 4 or 5 different makers who use like 3D printing technology to make their own line of custom balisongs, and they're relatively successful. And I think, again, going back to this, an example of something that people didn't know that they wanted and they didn't believe it was possible. And those are the things that I'm actively searching out for. Obviously, it's the toughest thing, and it's hard to continue to be creative and innovative, and it gets harder and harder. But I still try my best.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way that I look at it, and it's in knife making in general, materials are kind of something that's touchy, right? Like a blade steel, for instance, all the different types of blade steels and how clean or dirty the manufacturing process is, and what the end results are on heat treating, and how durable that blade is as a result, kind of has its own stigma, right?
Right.
There's some people that wouldn't, at some point in time use D2 as a blade, or CPM 154, 154 CM or whatever. There's different time periods where certain materials were not really thought of very highly. Like, there's Westinghouse made micarta for forever, and the industrial uses of phenolic resin had been around for a long time. But I knew lots of knife makers who thought that the ivorite or paper micarta was trashy is the wrong word, but it was it's an industrial material of sorts.
Yeah.
And so when they put it on knives, they're like, it's all right, but why don't you use something nice like desert ironwood, or put elephant ivory or something like that on it? Like do something nice if you're going to make a nice knife. Fast forward to today, where that same, like, everybody's looking for ivorite. Like, it's a finite resource, and nobody has it because everybody's coveting it because Westinghouse doesn't make it anymore. And sometimes it just takes a little bit of supply and demand to change the way that people think about materials. And I would argue that not all plastics and not all polymers are made the same. So I don't really necessarily think that it makes it inherently worse. But if you're using really basic cheap plastic, like plastic silverware plastic, I mean, that's a different story than the high quality materials that you're using in your Squiddies and everything. So
right.
But yeah, I mean, I would also agree that as a general use case, your like balisongs and what they're being used for is far and above what most knives are being subjected to from a use and abuse perspective. I would not expect anybody to mistreat my custom knives the same way that my kids abuse your balisongs that I bought for them. So
yeah.
One of the last questions I usually ask the guests I have on here is, if you have some like words of wisdom or advice for people that are, getting into knives, manufacturing, balisongs, things like that, like there's like some pearls of wisdom from your journey that we haven't included so far, what would they be?
I would say that, manufacturing in itself, whether it's a custom knife or production knife is that it's all expensive. There's like no cheap way to do it. But if you wanted it to be, on the budget side and you wanted to be effective with your money, I would recommend to really utilize 3D modeling software like Fusion 360 and 3D printing. I feel like that's really the best way, the most effective way to get your feet wet with designing and manufacturing. And that, if you're looking to be a little bit more custom and try making things with your hands, I still think that utilizing 3D printing and modeling is a great way to get a better understanding of what you're actually going to be making. And I think that, using resources like local community colleges, for manufacturing courses is also a really great way to learn, rather than, relying on, the internet to give you the most accurate and relevant knowledge to knife making, which is a very, very specific manufacturing process. So I would also say that for me personally, like outsourcing the products, it definitely helps me validate the design, and that it can be hard to just make everything on your own at the beginning. It's without access to the technology, it's obviously impossible. So there is definitely a lot to be said that outsourcing is, in my opinion, a great way to start out as well, because you're able to really see what your design looks like from an actual manufacturing company, and not the limited knowledge that you have, because you might have a great design, but if it's crudely made and it looks awful, it might not be enticing to customers, and then you just never launch your business. So and I think that the last thing is just try to be different. I think that there are many aspects of knife making and the knife industry where it's just incredibly congested, where everyone is kind of cramming in on the same ideas and just kind of throwing in their own aesthetics, which can work. But I feel like the really successful guys out there that I've seen are the people who are really, really devoted to doing something different and something in their own way. So I feel like it's important to stand out, and it's important to have your own image, and and also just like being a part of the community and just asking for help. Knife making is daunting to get into, but there's so many people that are incredibly passionate about it, and people like me, I love helping others get into it, because I've been there and I know how difficult it is to have no resources and to feel lost, and so I think that makers in general are really great resources and are generally open books. Unless you're competing directly, then perhaps you maybe choose a different guy. But generally, makers are really generous with their time, their knowledge, and we love helping others learn the craft. So definitely you need to spend time and effort into devoting yourself to learning the rudiments, but and when you can demonstrate that to someone who's knowledge and experience, then makers like us will have no issues with providing anything that we need, and we'll try our very best to help. So and like we discussed earlier, just be passionate about it, and eventually you will find your success.
Yeah, well, those are all really great pieces of advice. I appreciate you taking the time and talking to me for the time that you have. I will definitely post up all your social media contacts, and if anybody's interested, make sure that you give Squid Industries a follow on Instagram and whatnot. Keep an eye on their website, because they always have drops. And Lucas, again, I really appreciate your time.
Aaron, it's been an absolute pleasure being on the show. For all you listeners out there, flipping is a really, really fun hobby and sport, and it can be daunting because it does look dangerous, but there's a lot of resources out there, and I think everyone should really give it a try because it's awesome, and I think everyone have a lot of fun. So thanks again for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you have kids that don't have anything better to do with their time. Put a flipper in their hands.
I mean, it is a great dexterous sport. Hand-eye coordination goes a long way in many ways.
Oh yeah, I mean, my parents hated that I had a yo-yo, and I was just like always doing the Eiffel Tower and things like that. So I mean, I'd always find ways to occupy myself. So it's no different in the flipping community, and I appreciate that there's a company out there like yours that I can go to for a reasonably priced, high quality product. So thanks again for that as well.
My pleasure. That's the goal.
All right. Well, you have a good one. Thanks again, and I'm sure we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, we'll do. Thanks so much.
Talk to you later. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. Remember that you are loved, and God bless.